Your mitochondria are your friends. What they need is just like you need a safe place to live. Okay. They are usually not broken. I think that's the biggest lesson of Bob to me is that you do not usually have a mitochondrial disease.
Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. In this episode, I am speaking with my friend, Dr. Eric Gordon, who is coming onto the podcast for the second time. Dr. Gordon is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant minds out there in the field of treating chronic illness. He's been in practice for over 40 years in clinical practice, and he's also been involved in a huge amount of research related to treating and curing chronic illness, especially complex chronic illness, the type of complex chronic illnesses that leave most other doctors stumped and really have no idea what's causing it, what's going on, what the diagnosis is, how to treat it. This is really Dr. Gordon's area of expertise. In my opinion, he is one of the most novel thinkers out there and original thinkers out there. I love the way his mind works, and I love the conversations that I have with him. Every time we do a podcast together or have a conversation, we usually spend an hour or two separate from the recorded conversation, just talking and sorting through things. And we have wonderful, at times, a bit of debates. We have back and forths, we have slight disagreements, and we always find a way to reconcile our ideas. And again, I find him to be just one of the most original, novel thinkers and one of the most brilliant minds out there, particularly when it comes to treating complex chronic illness. So with no further ado, enjoy this conversation with Dr. Eric Gordon. Dr. Gordon, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ari. We've been having some really delightful conversations that haven't made it to airtime yet. So now we're going to give it another shot.
As you just alluded to, you are one of my absolute favorite people to talk to. And somehow whenever we're scheduled to do a conversation, we always end up talking for like an hour separate from the podcast. And I hope that listeners, after hearing this, will realize why, or will quickly start to realize why when they hear you speak, because you are one of the most fascinating original thinkers that I've encountered in the whole field of health experts. Somebody who really thinks deeply about things and is not just thinking in the sort of predefined boxes of conventional medicine or functional medicine and following the protocols that have been laid out by someone else and following the rules and operating within those paradigms, those conceptual frameworks. You are someone that has been in the trenches of working with complex chronic illness for many decades and many thousands of patients. And you are a deep thinker that has, thought about things in novel ways and tried to come up with your own explanations, your own conclusions, your own ways of doing things. And for me, that's what really makes an exciting conversation and makes it fun for me to speak with someone. So I am excited to get into this with you. And with that in mind, let's do like a meta level, 30,000 foot view. I want people to just get a sense of your overarching paradigm through which you see the landscape of health and illness. So how would you explain to someone what the difference is, what's going on physiologically in terms of what's happening inside that person's body between a person who is healthy versus a person who is chronically fatigued or chronically ill?
Wow. Well, first, thank you. That was like really the nicest introduction I've ever had. Thank you very much. I feel the same way. It's just so much fun to have a conversation with someone who, it's it's a fun, ping pong match of ideas going back and forth. And that's what makes life exciting to me is having a chance to share. And as you said, the question of what makes health it's funny. When I started in medicine, I really wanted to go there. I wanted to go in how to keep people healthy. That was kind of like my, but that went away pretty quickly in medical school. It just like, it dried up and was killed. because it was clear that nobody was teaching me anything about health. It was all about disease.
Mm.
And I went down that rabbit hole of disease because it was interesting. It's intellectually fascinating and also very gratifying when you help people who are really sick, you know. But I'd always had that deep interest in what in those days we called alternative medicine. So after about 12 years of what I call regular medicine, hospital-based stuff, I went off and started my own practice and started with, like many people did in those days, with chelation and thyroid and treating the gut and balancing hormones, and treating a lot of people who I had seen in what I call the regular medical world who had stayed, who had pneumonia or had their gallbladder out or, had some procedure. And, the surgeon was happy, you healed, but you still didn't feel well.
Mm.
So it was beginning to figure out how to restore health. And I was still hesitant to really go out there and treat people, how to train people how to be healthy, because what you have done, Ari, is you've really done deep dives into how to sustain health, how to keep people healthy, and I had always wanted to do that, but basically, my world was what got people sick and what kept them sick. So I never really did enough into how to keep healthy people healthy, and I was confused absolutely because I started off in the diet world, and that was a total mess. Should you be on a mucusless diet in those days, like a fruitarian, a vegetarian? I mean, Dick Gregory, who nobody remembers anymore, was a famous black comedian, became an aeritarian for a while, sort of like the early days of fasting, extreme fasting. Anyway, but it wasn't clear to me. So I kind of stayed out of that. And I started just treating sick people, because sick people, I at least could figure out what they needed. I didn't have the time or the brain space that you have to like do the deep dive on all the other things that will keep us well.
Mm.
But what's interesting is that over the years, I have, especially the last 10 years, I have found that actually what really helps some of my really sick people is really, you just vary it a little bit and it will really help really sick, really well people stay well. But we'll come back to that. But so but my interest is in always been in chronic illness. People, I always was frustrated because I'm an optimist and I always think everybody should be able to feel well again. And that's unfortunately probably not true. But if you have that attitude, you'll keep looking, and we've learned the possibilities have been really amazing, because in the early days, it was all about yeast. Back in the 70s, it was candida and parasites. That's what people knew about. Everybody thought that anybody with chronic illness, they had either some yeast problem or some a parasite. And then in the 90s, we started to hear about, Lyme disease, and that kind of rose in crescendo. And of course, there was always the environmental issue, the toxins. That was always on the side. That was the side piece, the toxicity in the environment, which has really probably started since, well, actually the last few hundred years, but it really took off in the early 1900s with the rise of the chemical industry and the petroleum-based chemicals. And in fact, that's why probably cancer started going up then, as was Dr. Warburg. I won't, I've got to be careful. I can spin too many stories. We won't go with Dr. Warburg quite yet. But so as the environment changed, people started to get more ill. Of course, the diet changed. But in my world, we were doing that detox diet, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't working. And so we kept looking for underlying issues. And we found, there was the, various candida and other yeast. There was the parasites, and there was Lyme. And then in the early 2000s, we started, it's Bartonella. First it was Babesia, then Bartonella, and a few others that were thrown in there. And then Dr. Shoemaker's work with mycotoxins, and not just mycotoxins, but some of the toxins from fish and from sea life, cyanobacteria. And that was a big thing. And then there was the clotting issues. Dr. David Berg did a lot on clotting, and Amy Yaskow started talking about MTHFR, you know, and glutathione became, and so all these things started happening, you know, together, and it started giving us a bigger repertoire because they're all right. They all apply to some people, you know, and
I think I just want to briefly interject. I think it's incredibly important for people to actually understand that history of the trends and the different things that are layers of knowledge that come to into awareness, and also along with that, like fads, like things that people become obsessed with for 5 or 10 years, and then they kind of go away, or we learn that they're not really true in the way that we think it is. And I think it's important for people to just understand that they are in a particular historical context, a point in time at which all of that stuff is still going on, and that we haven't arrived at this place of figuring it all out. Like, we are actually, you know, we look back, whatever it is, 20, 30 years ago, and go, oh, everybody thought margarine was healthy. And everybody got rid of their butter. Butter was super unhealthy, and we all bought margarine, hydrogenated vegetable oil, which all the so-called medical authorities and the scientific consensus, quote unquote, all told us that margarine was really healthy for us, and it was heart healthy, and it was going to prevent the heart disease caused by butter. And of course, now look how that played out. And I think it's important for people to understand that they are, right now in this moment, in a particular point in time in the historical context of all of these ideas and layers of awareness coming into, you know, insights coming out, and mistakes. And
yeah, well, because the truth value of all these things is not absolute. Okay, but I always tell people, like, first of all, epidemiologics, you know, do not run your life by the latest epidemiologic study. And what I mean by epidemiology is just looking at populations and saying, oh, these populations did X, and they are either healthy or sick, and therefore that is either good or bad. It's just, that's what's made such yo-yoing, and why so many people are feel crazy about what to eat. And we have to go back to the basic science. You know, we can get an idea. The epidemiology can guide us to look somewhere, but you need a lot more work before you decide that some diet is the perfect diet. Because besides that, there's no perfect diet right off the bat. It just depends on your body. There's bad diets. We can all agree on what a bad diet is, which is basically what most Americans eat.
yeah.
Okay.
But it's simultaneously the case that the opposite is true also. We also need to be wary of doing scientific experimentation, looking at things at the mechanistic level, and then extrapolating out of that. Margarine being a great example of that, saying, hey, butter, the saturated fat, causes heart disease, therefore we created this butter-like substance that's artificial but doesn't have trans fat, and therefore will be heart healthy since it doesn't have saturated fat. Yeah. And similarly with, like, hey, these extrapolating from the mechanism levels, insulin is a fat storing hormone, and carbs spike insulin, therefore carbs are the things that regulate whether you're fat or lean, which of course we have lots of studies now showing that that is not true. But there's countless examples of where things seem logical based on mechanistic studies, but then in the real world don't turn out to be true.
Well, that leads us to one of the things we've been meaning to talk to, and I know you're going to go into a deeper dive with the man himself, but Dr. Navio's thinking, because so let me just, one of the things that one of the parts of the baggage of, well, the alternative, which has now become the functional medicine world, which I think functional medicine misses a lot, unfortunately. Functional medicine is stuck where I was in the 90s, thinking that, you know, diet, exercise, your gut, your thyroid, you know, your hormones, and your emotions are the whole thing. And they are, until you get thrown off by a toxin or a bug, you know, then that story shifts. And that's the people that I deal with, that when that story shifts. You deal more with the people who are thankfully in the continuum of fair health, who want to be healthier. Though like I said, your breath work, I really was so impressed that you actually had that 7 course or 7 week part of the course for people with chronic fatigue, because most people don't understand how different an animal it is once you've gone off into chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
That where the things that normally help you backfire. But
right.
Anyway, so Dr. Navio, well, so part of the functional medicine and alternative medicine world was antioxidants. Okay, because that's another great example. It's clear from studies that reactive oxygen species, which mean having an electron that's a little too happy to join somebody else, okay, if in your cell, causes damage. Now, it's also how your body generates energy, so you don't want to shut it down completely. But we thought that antioxidants in the 90s and the early 2000s were the panacea. If you got enough antioxidants in you, you were going to be healthy.
I actually think that there's still probably roughly, I'd say 80-90% of functional medicine practitioners that are still largely operating in that paradigm.
Yeah. And it's just, and the thing that got me really confused was, I started seeing, as what happens, you start off and God is good and universe, whatever your stories are, you get, you start helping people, and then hubris, you think you know what you're doing, and then people come who you have no idea because they're sicker. And that's kind of what happens when you're in this field for a long time. You just see sicker and sicker people. So those first tricks or things that work start failing. And, but in the early days, the antioxidants and some of the mitochondrial support medicines, supplements, the CoQ10s, the ALAs, the alpha lipoic acid, they're really good, but they help. But when people get sick, to the point, what I call sick is people who are chronically ill. You've had something, 6 months later, you still have it. Then it's kind of chronic. And then your body has shifted somewhere, and we have to work on that. But they would come in with shopping bags and sometimes literally boxes. I mean, often boxes of supplements they were taking, and they were taking them. It wasn't just boxes. The desire to get well, especially in successful people who were well before, these were high functioning people, and suddenly their lives were not there. So they read everything and went everywhere, and they collected supplements, and they weren't helping them. And that always bugged me. I mean, I didn't understand, what was going on. And then somebody sent me Dr. Navio's paper in like 2013. And it was like a light bulb went off, explaining that, the mitochondria aren't broken. See, that was the model we all had. And and I think that's still, unfortunately, the model I hear over and over again.
Yeah.
People think the mitochondria in chronic illness are in a disease state. And most of the time, I mean, occasionally there are people who will stay sick long enough where they'll knock out a mitochondrial gene or a nuclear gene that controls some of the mitochondrial function, and they will have a dysfunctional mitochondria. But most people, their mitochondria are just responding to a danger signal. And that's basically what the cell danger response is saying, is that your mitochondria not only make energy. I know you've spoken about this before. We all learned about them as the powerhouse of the cell. They make energy, and was always my model. And what Dr. Navio accumulated, not just his, multiple people's research. I mean, that's what makes him great, again, is his ability to take in lots of different people's ideas and synthesize them. Okay. And the idea that the mitochondria were actually our immune sensor. They just sense, and they sense change. I mean, danger is a nice way to put it. But they sense change. And sometimes it rises to the level of danger. And sometimes it's just, we have to shift a little bit. When it's shifting a little bit, one of the really interesting things is the mitochondria make ATP. I mean, that's how we're all taught in school. Mitochondria make ATP. ATP is the fuel of the body. That's how you store energy, and your muscles use it, and well, then it stores it. I think you're better at this than me. In muscles, isn't creatine the thing that really stores a lot of the energy? I always got that. I'll leave that to you.
Well, there's kind of different layers depending on which course you're taking, that the lens through which they'll talk about this. But the way they talk about it in a biochemistry course is often different from how they'll talk about it in a pathology course where you're learning about disease states, which is different from how you learn about it in an exercise physiology course. But the creatine phosphate system, from an exercise physiology perspective, the creatine phosphate system is for sort of all out, very high intensity, short duration bursts of effort, less than 10 seconds. And then after that, you've got you start having to tap into glycolytic pathways. Maybe I'll talk about it in reverse. Low intensity and at rest, you should be producing most of your energy from oxidizing fats in the mitochondria to produce ATP. So no real taxation on the creatine phosphate system. And then at moderate and higher intensities, the fuel is required faster, and you've got to shift more towards anaerobic glycolysis, the burning of carbohydrates for fuel, and that largely takes place in a relatively inefficient process outside mitochondria. And then at the highest intensities, very short duration, all-out efforts, that's the creatine phosphate system.
Okay. Well, see, thank you. But actually, that was like a nice overview of how the mitochondria, how we'll talk about how the mitochondria shift what they do. Because when we're supposedly purring along at a nice speed, okay, in everyday life, and things are working, okay, and your energy is pretty good, your mitochondria are burning fats, and mostly fats, hopefully fats and some proteins, and and you're using up your carbohydrates to get into the mitochondria. It's a chemical called pyruvate get in there, and in the mitochondria they get converted and are passed on to the electron transport chain to make ATP, which is all well and good. Now, when the mitochondria realize that they're not getting as much of some of the chemicals some of the raw materials as they should, okay, not so much not the pyruvate, but lots of other raw materials that come in to be processed, okay. When that happens, they notice there's a steal, they call it, is a little, that something else is using it up. And it's usually, probably evolutionarily, it was probably a virus. Because viruses have co-evolved with us since we were single cell organisms. And who knows how much we depend on the viruses to kind of like give us the information to evolve, maybe. But that's another story. So anyway, so when the mitochondria senses that it's not getting enough, it begins to turn down its use of ATP, or its production of ATP. And it also begins to send some of this ATP out to the cell surface, because normally there's a very low amount of ATP and some of its derivatives around the cell. But when the mitochondria sense a little bit of danger, they start to put more outside the cell. And this is probably the first signal of inflammation in the body. Like with COVID, people have heard all about interferon gamma and all this other stuff. That's secondarily. That happens later on. The first signal that there's a problem is that there's excess ATP around the cell. And
this is also upstream of hormones. It's worth pointing that out too. Hormonal changes take
they happen later.
More like hours, days to weeks. And what you're talking about is pretty much almost instantaneous.
Yeah, this is how your body knows somebody's visiting. Is it, and is it probably faux? I mean, it's there, and it can be a chemical, anything that will change the flow of molecules into the mitochondria is sensed, and their first response is to put out a halo of ATP, which calls in your white blood. It starts triggering your whole immune system at that point, and the neighboring cells. Okay, and if it happens in enough of our cells, we develop what Dr. Navio and other people call sickness behavior, which is probably a very evolutionary conserved way of keeping us from infecting everybody around us, because it happens even in single cell organisms. If they sense that there's a virus in there, they no longer will clump together. They'll split apart
Oh,
and they'll
interesting.
go away
I
from
didn't know
the
that
group.
layer to the story.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fascinating. I mean, that's what's so interesting about Dr. Navio's thoughts, is because of his deep interest in evolutionary biology. That's always a check to see if your good ideas really hold water in biology. If it kind of looks like you can give the same story over eons,
Uh-huh.
there's probably something to it, you
Yeah.
know. Again,
Okay,
remember
so
the thing. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to remind people that I use the word story for a reason, because people put too much faith in quote unquote science. And I
Hmm.
think you can if it's physics. Okay. I mean, Newtonian physics is pretty rock solid. Okay. But, 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 but biology,
Gravity, momentum,
yeah, right.
collisions,
It kind of works. It's fairly it's reproducible. We've shown that. But
Yeah.
biology, what our understanding of biology is not that good. And people get so hung up on the doctor said. Well, we're wrong. I mean, when you start medical school, the famous joke is half of what we're going to teach you is wrong, and we don't know which half. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not a joke.
Well,
It's true.
there's another layer to that. I mean, we could talk all day as you and I know, but another layer that's worth adding to what you're saying there is I would argue that actually biologists studying other species know quite a lot in many cases. And what's remarkable is that we humans have, from the time in modern history, from the time we're young, particularly if we're growing up in the Western world, we're indoctrinated with the belief that we are separate from all other animal species. There's nature and there's all the other animal species, and then there's humans and the human
Mm.
world that's separate to us. And and we don't look at ourselves and we don't analyze what's going on with ourselves in the way that we would if we were biologists studying the human species. And there's a certain, I don't want to digress here too much, but there's a certain level of common sense that we humans apply to every other living thing that we don't apply to ourselves.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you had a situation where all the, like in the Great Lakes in the 1970s, all these fish start washing up on shore with tumors and they start washing up dead, and the birds that are feeding on fish from the lake start dying and start producing eggs that are too frail, and the species
Yeah.
are decreasing in numbers. We, as humans, biologists that are studying those animal species, we have a certain level of common sense that we would apply in that scenario, where we would go, hey, I think maybe something's off in the lake. Maybe there's something wrong with the lake. Maybe there's something toxic in there, and we need to address what's going on in the environment, because these fish shouldn't, and these birds shouldn't be expressing so much disease and shouldn't be dying so much. And yet, if we were to apply the way that humans think about humans to that scenario, what we would do is we would set up little hospitals on the shores of the lakes, and we would start administering drugs to all the sick fish, and we would dump drugs in the water. We would study the biochemistry of the different disease states that are going on in these fish, and analyze the tissues of the tumors, and we'd say, we've found the solution. It's this biochemical that's being expressed too much, and we've developed this drug. It's miraculous. It stops this chemical from being produced, and therefore it's going to save all the fish. Let's dump this drug in the lakes, and set up these hospitals where we give drugs to the sick fish, and that will fix everything. So we've developed a very bizarre paradigm for treating our own health problems that no biologist would apply to any other species.
But again, this goes back to systems thinking again. Okay, is that so? What we're saying is that medicine is basically battlefield medicine. Most of our advances in medicine have been from war. We really do great when we're putting people back together again.
Yeah.
And that works really well with the engineering approach, which is what you described. You have a problem, you fix the problem. Now you don't look really deep underneath because it was a bullet. You didn't have to look that far. I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that it was the war, but that we can't do much about.
Right.
But what you're describing is a system, and medicine never thought in terms. I shouldn't say never. That's not true. But we got distracted by the brilliance of our weapons, as
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
sort
great
of
way of describing it.
I just ruined Leonard a little Leonard Cohen line. But anyway, the we because we got so good at fixing things when we saw the cause, we started thinking only in terms of A causes B, and
Yeah.
we don't go back and what's causing A now when it comes to us. And then our financial, now we can blame big pharma, but it's true. That is true that all the money and all the brains work that way. We
Yeah.
have trained people to work that way. If you want to do a grant for a study, you better have an A causes B, or you're not going to get funded. So, you are absolutely right there. And so, but again, that's the problem of one of the issues of human biology, is that we don't look as a systems view, even though people are talking about it now, but it's still not really happening much. Um, and the other big issue is that we do studies on mice that don't look anything like a real mouse anymore. I mean, they're so genetically modified or inbred and modified
Yeah.
that we can learn A causes B. But what really happens in the system is different. And also, we're not mice.
Yeah.
Remember leptin? Leptin cures obesity in mice. Well, it doesn't do much in people because we're different. We
Right.
have similar systems, but we're different enough that you can't learn too much. So,
Right.
but I'm going to be surprised myself. I'm going to go back to the cell danger response. Linearity is not my strong suit. If you
So
didn't,
so let's go high. Let's tie a nice little
yeah,
bow on everything that you've
yeah.
talked about here, and just say super succinctly, if you were going to summarize in a sentence or two, what is the difference between someone who's healthy versus someone who's ill?
They're in balance. Oh no, but actually both are in balance, I should say. Is their mitochondria, okay, are functioning as though it's safe.
Mhm.
Okay. So safety and danger is the thing. And there are safety signals from the brain, and there are local safety signals. Okay. And if the danger signal is loud locally, like if you broke your arm, okay, it's a loud danger signal. Okay, that is very hard. Until that heals, you're not going to be able to turn off all the inflammatory changes that are happening in your mitochondria and in your cells until that heals. But after it heals, you still need your brain to be able to turn off the danger signal, because that can get stuck on. So
Right.
chronic illness is when the danger signal somewhere is stuck on.
Hmm.
Okay, health is when you get back to a peacetime, an arm, like things are copacetic. It's okay. Your mitochondria are busy sensing, and they can, because remember, you've got trillions of cells. So we're not, the thing we have to remember is that these mitochondrial things can happen just in your liver or just in a small part of your liver. That's how you wind up with chronic illness. If these happen throughout your whole body, well, at the same time, you get septic, you can die, you wind up in the hospital. But chronic illness is when these things are happening in small portions of your body. Some brain cells, some liver cells, some kidney cells. What we have to realize is that we're not a monolith. Okay, we're a mosaic.
Mm.
Okay, so we have cells that are stuck in various forms, in various states of this cell danger response. And if we're really healthy, we get to turn most of them, we get those cells to either die or revert back to normal. When we stay sick, some of those cells stay stuck in one. Dr. Navio's created 3 stages of that. And in the first stage, there's a lot of inflammatory noise happening. In the second stage, there's a lot of growth happening. So that's when you get things, you can get like, atheromas, like calcifications in your blood vessels and things, because the cells there are going a little bit of inflammation. Then they get stuck in this, like, oh, let's keep making more cells. cancers are stage or a CDR2. And then the CDR3 is when the cells have repaired and now they have to restore cell to cell communication. Okay, because when the cell goes into the CDR1, one of the first things it does is it hardens the membrane. It stops receiving information as well. Okay, and that's where people start noticing, like, their thyroid isn't working or the hormones aren't working as well, because some of their cells, not all of them, some of their cells are not responding to the information. And in CDR2, that's still happening a bit. CDR3 is when the cell is learning how to become part of its local environment again. Okay,
So,
and
so
so
it's important to, I think, for people to understand that in contrast to, let's say, a paradigm like the conventional medical paradigm in the West that sort of looks at disease as mistakes or random chance or as a result of genetics, and that the stupid body is doing this process of, mistakenly doing this thing, and we need to use our drugs to sort of conquer over nature, to intervene in the dumb, accidental, or random chance processes of the body to correct it, to interrupt these disease processes with drugs. So, you've got depression. Oh, it's a neurotransmitter imbalance in the brain that just arose for random reasons. Here's a drug to correct your serotonin deficiency. You've got cardiovascular disease. Here's a drug to lower your cholesterol that your body is mistakenly elevating that will interrupt it from generating atherosclerosis. You've got high blood pressure. Here's a beta blocker to change, or something that acts on the hormones that act on the kidneys to change retention of water and salt and potassium so that it changes your blood pressure, because the stupid body is misregulating blood pressure. And in contrast to that, the paradigm that Dr. Naviaux presents and that you're communicating here from the cell danger response is one of respect for intelligence of the body, that the body is intelligently adapting to these danger signals, but sometimes it's supposed to complete the healing cycle and come back into homeostasis and health, but sometimes it gets stuck. So talk to me about, like, self-defense, the body's self-defense, and how and why it might get stuck in that position.
This is me, not Bob. Bob is Dr. Naviaux. Okay, this is my story. Okay, because it's the one I use to think about things. Is I call it the neurotic tendency of the body. Okay, because we're all neurotic. I never met a normal person yet. Okay, and I said, but 40 years just listening to people. We're all weird in our own way. Okay, but and what happens? We work on patterns. Okay, we're a pattern recognition. Our brains are really good at pattern recognition, and we're really good at creating pattern. Okay, and what happens is that the system you get stuck in its loop, and it stops communicating. So when you have chronic illness, part of your cells are not communicating with the rest of the system, and it's like I said, it's like a bad relationship. You hit a subject that if you talk about, it's going to be ugly, so you stop talking about it. And that's what parts of your body do, essentially. They stop communicating optimally with each other. And so then you have organs that are no longer working as a team. They're no longer working optimally, So, and the question is, how do you restore this? How do you what's the therapy that's going to get the parts to talk about? Mm-hmm. And here's where another little divergence. Dr. Naviaux would like us to heal the way that you would like people to stay healthy, which is sun, earth, healthy food, good water, just sending the messages that are through nature is safety. Okay, I mean, that's it. I mean, again, animals go into these states, or actually amoebas or small little plankton, tiny fishes. If they get into areas where the water is polluted, they'll go into this half dead state. Okay, especially when the organisms are really tiny. They get the fishes, no, but there's some shrimp that are so small they can do this. They just like shut down, sort of like people with chronic fatigue on some level
Yeah.
shut down where they can't function. Their function is very limited, but they're not dying.
It's
Feel
it's
like
like
what?
it's like in a way analogous to hibernation in the
Yeah,
sense that
yeah,
you're more
absolutely.
likely to survive a harsh environment if you sort of turn down the engines and go into a mode where you're not allowing so much communication, you're not allowing so much environmental inputs, you're kind of shutting down the systems.
Exactly. And that's what chronic illness kind of is on some level, is shutting down. So, and the way that these single cell organisms come back is when they get signals that the water's clean again. But they
Uh-huh.
need multiple signals that the water's clean. Not just one little signal won't do it, because if they just got one, nature can fool you, so they need a lot of signals before they get safe, just like us.
Hmm.
You know, just somebody who slaps you around just because they give you a big hello one day, you're not going to be really relaxed. So it's we need a lot of signals. Your body needs a lot of signals. So in Dr. Navi, in what I could call his, he calls it salugenesis, and it's the worldview that I would love to be, is that if we, and it is true, many people will heal if given the right environment. Okay, I mean, this is why, all the places, the old sanatoriums, not for crazy people, but for healing. They all in Europe, all over the world, people would go, and there were the waters, special waters, good sun, good food, supportive environment, and people can heal from lots of things with that. So
Yeah.
there's no question. Unfortunately, I believe that our world has become so toxic in the last 40, 50 years that it's still important to do all that. That's critical to create a safe environment and make sure that the diet is clean and healthy and you're getting exposure to sun. You're actually touching the earth now and then. That's pretty amazing if you can do that. Be part of near a tree. I mean, these are the signals that our body needs. Okay. And they give safety signals. But as I said, if the local organ is still really screaming, those aren't enough. Okay. That local noise will still be sending things back. And I said, your brain isn't that smart. It goes into pattern easily. And I said, if you ever wondered, look how hard it is to change a habit. We are creatures of pattern.
Give a message of hope, Eric.
Oh, well,
Otherwise, I'm
well,
going to have
well,
to
message of
censor you
hope.
for creating too many
Well,
nocebo effects.
okay, yeah, no, I mean, it's always, I always joke about that, because when I was younger, when was it, in the 90s, I worked with Norm Shealy for a year, and Norm was very big on positive affirmations, and I've always been like, I don't want that much. Anyways, talk about my psychology. I was always afraid of them. I don't want that much power, but but it's true. Yeah, there is always hope, because I mean, that's what we do. We offer hope because you can usually find your way through. People don't have to be healed completely. I worked on cars when I was a kid. People are much easier than cars. You got to do perfect. People, you just got to get close, because the healing mechanism works.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you can't be in the perfect environment, if you just take away some of the noise,
Mm-hmm.
it helps.
Yeah.
Okay, you do what you can. Nobody, I mean, not many of us get to like be, lying on the beach or lying in the woods, and like relaxing and being fed, because when you're really sick, you don't have the energy to do it yourself. It's not like you can just go into the woods and go, I'm going to go camping for the week. It doesn't work. So you have to do what you can. But all these pieces matter. But then what I have found is that it's like pickup sticks. We just have to find what pieces what's keeping the inflammation going. Like one of the big things, as we talked before, went the candida, the parasites, the Lyme, the blah 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 blah. Well, the new one in the last 5-7 years has been the mast cell activation, which is really just saying your immune system is pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
As an aside, but for some people, lowering that load at the same time, lowering the chemicals or whatever is stimulating their mast cells, and also giving them, using medicines or herbs to suppress, to quiet them down, to allow the body to reach a point that it feels at peace, so we can reestablish control again. Okay, so the mast cells can learn And maybe you'll knock off some of those mast cell clones that have been really upregulated. Because that is the cool thing about the body, is that when cells are making noise that's unnecessary, sometimes we can learn to just let them die, because many of our immune cells that are stuck creating noise in our system, and I won't go into the details because immunology is a black hole of information. Okay, because we keep finding another chemical and another signaling molecule every day. It's just and another type of immune cell. I mean, that's the thing. We started off with mast cells, monocytes, macrophages, and T and B cells, and now we have lineages of all of them that go off to 4, 5, and hundreds in the T and B cells of lineages. So but luckily they're all in a dance together, and that's the hope. Is life is about balance and dance, and you don't have to fix everything. That's what I really encourage people to remember, is when you're sick and you feel hopeless and helpless, small changes, you don't know how your body is going to amplify them into good information. Okay, because that's possible. And the sicker you are, I think you have to look harder in finding out what I call what's on top. Because you can have, if you test, you can have a million things. Okay, because you test healthy people and you'll find many positive Lyme tests. Okay, in people who are fine. So, and parasites, and because we can live with these. These are not death sentences. The issue is your immune system is imbalanced and not able to keep them in place. Sometimes we can eradicate some of these bugs from our immune system, but most of the time, we're not a sterile environment. We can live in balance with these guys. But if there's something that's screaming danger all the time, then we can start reacting to things that are only mildly annoying. Well, like I said, if your immune system most of the time probably is working as a fairly reasonable 25 or 30-year-old. But when you start to get sick, it starts to regress. And many times it winds up like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, that it just screams. If it's hungry or tired, it's just going to scream. Okay, you're not going to have a lot of rational conversation about why and what you can do about it. It's just screaming. And that's what we have to do. We have to find the insult to your body that's making it scream. And once you take that away, the rest of the system can come back into place, with healthful environments. And like I said, the breath is probably one of the best places to start, because most people can do that. A lot of the other things are harder. But it's always maintaining hope and keep looking, because when you go to, around here, everybody goes to Stanford or goes to Mayo, and they're brilliant doctors, but they're useless because they won't do anything unless you fit in the box. If you happen to, it's fine to go there, because sometimes you do fit into their box. They'll be able to diagnose you with an X and maybe give you something that will quiet down the noise in your body. And then when you go back and you do the things that will bring health, you'll be fine. You'll go back to health. That's really cool. Unfortunately, people with chronic illness it doesn't happen that way, because chronic illness is multiple factors going wrong at the same, or going slightly wrong at the same time. So the symphony is off, and they have a tin ear. And today what's happened in medicine, so people should understand, is that you can't, if you're in a major hospital, you can't do something that has not been approved for that thing by usually the FDA, or if not the FDA, at least the hospital committees, which usually want the FDA to approve it. Okay. And that, you don't need FDA medicine most of the time, and you're not going to get anything. It's very, very, very frustrating, because these people often know solutions for you, but because it's not in the book, they literally can't use it. So And but luckily, COVID, I think, might change that in about over the next 5 years, but it's going to take time because the long COVID studies, they're just beginning, and they're studying. They're not treating anything yet except POTS, except the postural orthostatic tachycardia, and a bunch of other kind of more foolish medicines that they're using. But they will. I really believe they will. And
By the way,
that's my message of hope, is that I think that there's enough. I've spoken to some of the people at UCSF who were involved in their early long COVID work, and they're really dedicated, good doctors. Okay, they're from the academic world, and so they're a little limited in what they'll look at, but they really want to help, and they have enthusiasm, and maybe the government keeps giving, they'll actually have money and they'll help people. But I'm sorry, we kind of digressed a little bit. You need a success. If you look, hit me again, and I'll try to be succinct for a sum up.
let's circle back to the mitochondria. So
Okay.
let's say we adopt the paradigm that you've described here, and we understand illness as too many danger signals being sensed by the mitochondria, and these sort of the body getting stuck in these adaptive self-defense modes.
Yeah. What's the magic way? Well, that's the
what
problem.
what do we do with that, and how on a practical level, how does it relate to the mitochondria? Can you speak to getting well from sort of through a mitochondrial lens?
Yes, it's, I said, it's pickup sticks, okay? Because there is a place where my direct mitochondrial support helps people, okay? But it's usually when we've removed the inflammatory noise, okay? Because if the this is my worldview, if the bug is still perturbing your system a lot, or the virus or the toxin, okay, then when you feed the mitochondria, when you make them stronger, you're just going to make more noise. And that's why people will tell you that they take some of the like people take NAD or high doses of CoQ10, and some of them feel worse. They not, again, most people either feel better or nothing, but a lot of people with chronic illness will actually feel worse when they take things that really move their mitochondria, because your mitochondria either are the ones that are left begin to clean out the garbage, okay? Because when you're in this state of chronic illness, you don't have enough energy usually, or enough or enough cells that are actively doing it to really get rid of the toxins that you're making every day. I always say, like, when you're sick, you don't take the garbage out all the time. You just, like, that's an extra, first you eat and go to the bathroom, and then you take the garbage out, maybe. But lying back in bed is often what people will do. And it's the same thing in the body. And so when the garbage builds up a bit, and you suddenly give more energy to your remaining cells that can function, they start trying to process it. And the toxins, you often, okay, so why do you get sick? I have to go back a minute, because otherwise this is going to be like magical thinking, okay? Is that in my worldview, you can be the big insult, but usually it's repetitive, lots of insults, okay, small things.
Just, I want to make sure that people know the word insult here doesn't mean the way that most people use that word. It means stresses on the body, or things that are causing damage.
Exposures. I'm thinking mostly of exposures to toxins, or bugs, and often a combination of the two, because usually your body's designed to respond fine to the bug. The toxin, some of us don't do so well. And I think that's I'm sorry, I hate to add another point here, but it's just so important. It's the biochemical individuality. You're all different. Okay. What cured your uncle may help you, but what cured your uncle's, sister-in-law less likely. And it goes along. I mean, it's just we're different. And people, and again, medicine doesn't treat you as different. They treat you as though you're all the same. And if we use a hammer on your body, we're all the same, you know? But if we're trying to help your body heal, we have to work with what you can do, and especially with detoxing. Okay, and that's why so many people will try a detox and feel worse and get sick, because as Dr. Parpia, my partner in all things, as we say, she coined the term pretox, because so many people try to detox, when their bowels aren't working. It just doesn't work, or they have issues where they can't sweat, and they have to, we have to work on these things and clean up the environment around them, but more importantly, get their bowels working before they try to detox. But the removing the so detox and getting rid of the really important bug, or just tamping it down enough so the body has room, because you're trying to get more of your cells online. You're trying to get more of your mitochondria that are working normally, responding to the environment, and able to also then respond well to those signals that you give it, whether it be supplements or sun, to work better. Because remember, sun increases our energy. I mean, that's like, red light therapy, saunas, all these things increase our energy in our bodies. So if you find that you crash with these things, just try them less, tiny amounts. I mean, that's the thing that's so important. Don't give up on what is generally a safe and mild therapy, such as we just mentioned, those kind of things that, I'm not talking about a drug, but don't give up on these things because they make you sicker. Just do less of them, less often. Let your body begin to accommodate. Again, it's when you change quickly, the body reacts. It might not be safe anymore. When you're healthy, okay, and not even healthy, to be fair, this is why I call back to the psychology. People like me who have a little ADD, okay, we like change. I like different. My body responds to different with aha. But many people, okay, don't. Many people prefer order. They need things in a certain order. They need their days structured, and then they feel safe and good. And if you're like that and you're chronically ill, you have to have respect and not try to do too many things, because any change, your brain, forget about your mitochondria in your cells, the mitochondria and the whole brain, the higher level controller of your immune system, that's what you feel safe. Okay, you feel safe if your desk is clean. That's good. So make sure that your life is like that. Don't try to shift what don't do too many new things. Go slow. Respect your fear. Don't give into it, but respect it. I think that's so important, that people really respect who they are, what it is their body can tolerate. There are many people who are ill are athletes. Well, they're a different kettle. I mean, I don't think people like you realize how the rest of us are. Like, you can work out, I don't know how many hours a day, or do whatever, and like, I'll 20 minutes, and my line is, then when's lunch? I'm tired, I'm done. I mean, we're different, and we have to respect that. And that's a big part of the healing journey, is you have to be brave enough to try something. Because I know people hit that point where trying anything is scary, because I did it and it made me sicker. But doing nothing, unfortunately, generally doesn't work if you've done it for a while. I'm not all down with doing nothing for a week or two. But if you've been doing it for 6 months, it's not going to be a winning strategy. You have to try things, and you have to keep open. And so, getting back, your mitochondria are your friends. What they need is just like you need, a safe place to live. Okay, they are usually not broken. I think that's the biggest lesson of Bob to me, is that you do not usually have a mitochondrial disease. Dr. Navio is an expert in mitochondrial diseases. That's what he studied. Inborn errors of metabolism is a fancy, anyways, is a set of them, but he in mitochondrial disease in general is his area of expertise. And what he found was that most of the people with chronic illnesses didn't have mitochondrial disease. Their mitochondria were working in the normal fashion, but they were stuck in one of these, in this cycle where they're either creating too much inflammation, they were creating too many new cells, or they weren't communicating. They were, and they were, well, actually the mitochondria weren't communicating. Also the mitochondria don't communicate, which is another story. They actually change shape, but they go from connected spaghetti-like things to like what he calls meatball, like really separate. And they have to go back to that spaghetti-like form to produce enough energy for you to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do all the things that Ari teaches. I mean, that's the point. I mean, that's the beauty, is your whole worldview is how to heal your mitochondria. And if you're too weak to do those things, do them as little as possible and look for what else is happening. Because if you do have, I mean, I don't want to overemphasize, but that mold exposure, if you're living with mold or colonized with mold, you're not going to get better until you get out of that environment. I mean, I wish that wasn't true. That's the thing I hate the most. I hate mold because I don't like to make people disrupt their whole lives, and it's terrible. But anyway, I mean, so you have to be real with yourself and be willing to do deep dives and find doctors who will work with you and think with you. And we don't know everything. We know none of us can be an expert in everything. I mean, so just understand, if you're seeing someone who's really good, and you're kind of stuck, ask, because, or read and get other advice and work around it. Because the medical model, I've tried to get this across. There are Lyme doctors who think everybody has Lyme, and chronic fatigue doctors who think everybody has chronic fatigue, and mast cell doctors who think everybody has mast cell, and mold, and it's just
Don't forget about adrenal fatigue.
adrenal. Yeah, that's one of the things that Ari and I really love to agree on there. Adrenal fatigue, because yes, your adrenals can need support, but that's not your only problem, and that people, yeah, it's your adrenals can be overused and ridden hard, but if you support the rest of your system, they're going to start working like they're supposed to.
Dr. Gordon, I want to wrap up with one
Yeah.
thing that we haven't touched on much. I think we went over it one time in passing. But I love your thoughts on this topic, and I think it would be important to sort of complete this conversation and this story, this paradigm that you've given to people here. And I would like to talk to you. I would like you to talk about the power of the mind and intentionality and the placebo effect in this process of healing, and if you can connect it to the mitochondria and the story that you've presented here.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because I said I'm one who used to kind of disparage, not disparage. I always believe. I mean, I like the placebo effect, but because I had patients who had failed so many therapies and had spent, life savings on therapies. And then they would respond to someone and they'd go back to their doctor and he'd say, that's a placebo effect. And, I figured, so that's why I used to have a hard time with the concept, because like, come on, give me a break. This was the $1.50, supplement, and, the $10,000 fancy medical treatment did nothing. And this is the placebo. So anyway, but intentionality. Now, that is something I have seen to be so important. And actually, it wasn't directly in medicine that I saw it, but I see it every day in medicine. I guess I can go, but I don't want to. That's too long of a story. So let me just tell you how I see it in medicine. Is that a lot of people have the desire to heal, Okay. But to truly have the intention is a lining up of energy that is difficult for most of us to do because, you know, we've grown up in a culture that is fractured, and always had. I shouldn't. I'm not blaming American culture, all culture. Okay. Once we left the tribal level, okay, then you have control issues. Okay. Because once you get more than, like, I don't know, 40, 80 people living together, then you have to have a lot of you start having hierarchy, and you got guilt because you got to take care of people. You lose you're not operating from joy anymore. You're operating from coercion on some level. It's unfortunate, but that's what happens. The duty to the other becomes not the person in front of you, but some concept, and then we start to coerce ourselves. And so being able to really line up your being is hard because there's lies in there. There are places where you wanted something that was good and you didn't do it. You didn't do it because people told you would be bad if you did it. And in my worldview, there are sociopaths out there and really bad people, but telling them not to do bad things doesn't work anyway. and most people want to do good. Most people, they want to hold the door open for you. They want to help you with whatever they don't want to maybe spend their life serving you, but in everyday life, they want to do good deeds for each other. It's just a joy when people serve each other, you know. And when that is your intentionality, is working out of joy, is working out of desire to serve, I think that really allows health to blossom. And you have to bring that to yourself, because when you become ill, yeah, it's harder to serve, to really take care of other people. But then you have to bring that to yourself, okay? That place, and find that joy in you, which is, again, I always hesitate to tell people this who are, like, I remember how I feel if I have a stomach cramp. Tell me to have joy in myself, and I might want to slap you, So it's understand, but even in the, but if the suffering doesn't go away and you keep living, then yeah, you got to find something in it that you got to find that place that's quiet. Okay. I mean, you don't have to. You can just stay in the suffering, but I don't have a whole lot of options for you. You can stay in the suffering, you know, all the time, or you can visit the suffering, but occasionally give yourself places where you can just, think of something that gives you joy. Okay. And I'm not talking about happiness. That's a whole different thing. But that the way I can feel joy is how I feel just when that look, when you look in a baby's eyes and you just smile, that's just joy. There's nothing. What are you going to get? There's no trading. There's just being. Okay. And it's the beingness that is, to me, the ultimate signal, that the body is safe. And so,
I love that. I love that. I want to stop you because I want to end on that note because
yeah,
it's
no, I know that. I want to stop you too, because I just think I would just kill it.
let's stop there. Let's leave people with that because I think it's a really profound thought to think about is really getting back to that place without so much busyness, without so much stuff to do.
Yeah.
And I'll
And it
add,
could be momentary.
yeah,
Remember that it's momentary. You don't live in joy.
yes,
It comes and goes, but tasting it, that tells your mitochondria at your core, okay, that it's safe, and that will help them heal and stop defending you against what they don't need to defend.
yes,
Okay, they're fighting, they're like the Japanese soldier that was found in, like, still fighting on Guam.
yeah.
I mean, like, the war's over.
There's a book that ties into what you're talking about that I want to recommend to people. It's a little bit esoteric, so it won't necessarily appeal to everyone, but I want to mention this because it ties in nicely with what you just talked about. Let me find the name of it. I have it on my bookshelf, but I don't want to go searching for it at this moment. It's by a a French spiritual sort of meditation teacher named Daniel Odier. Odier is how you spell his name, Odier. And he's written a number of books, which are excellent. Two that I want to recommend. One is called The Doors of Joy, 19 Meditations for Authentic Living. And the one that I really want to recommend is called Desire, The Tantric Path to Awakening. And the word tantric will scare off a lot of people in that title, but it really actually, what's described in this book are essentially micro practices about getting more in touch with the presence of your sensual experience in life. That doesn't mean sexual experience. It means the sensual experience of when you drink water, don't do it mindlessly, like actually really feel that water going into your system, have a visualization of these molecules of water filling your cells, hydrating your cells functioning well. Take some moments to just feel that. And it's presented as practices very much in the way you just described this is not meant or implied to be your way of being at all times during the day. You're going to go back into thinking mode and your ego is going to go into what needs to be done, what needs to be fixed. That's very normal and from an evolutionary perspective, obviously evolved for an important reason because it's adaptive, which a lot of people forget. But these tastes of these micro practices to come back into just presence of the sensual experience. When you drink water, when you take a breath, don't just breathe mindlessly, take a couple breaths and imagine millions of little smiley faces filling your lungs, and those smiley faces of oxygen now going from your lungs into your blood and then filling your body and flooding your body with this tingly sensation. And now your cells, your mitochondria turning on and producing more energy, your brain, your heart, your liver, your intestines, your muscles, all these mitochondria now producing more energy as a result of this breath. If you just take 5 or 10, 30-second micro practices like this throughout the day, I think it's a really profound way to inject some safety signals into your day, and it's free and it's easy.
And thank you. That's beautiful. That's so. I love the simplicity is the saving grace, because for those of us who are not great meditators, these small things can be so powerful. You know, there are the people who need to sit all day, God bless, but many of us derive incredible help and from just momentary meditations. You know, we're all, I said, we're different. So don't get hung up on prescriptions. Find your way.
Dr. Gordon, as always, it is an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I always come away feeling smarter and more knowledgeable. And no, in all seriousness, every time I have a conversation with you, I feel like I learn some new things, I gain new insights, and it helps me sharpen my own views on things and my own paradigms and conceptual frameworks to just to play ping pong, as you said, with the way that you see things. So thank you so much. And to everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed this brilliant talk from Dr. Gordon. And Dr. Gordon, also let people know where they can follow your work or get in touch with you if they want to work with you.
Don't forget, yes, gordonmedical.com. Just if you want to, I think if you go there and if you hit, I think it's info@Gordon Medical or something, and you can talk to Rachel, who is our new patient coordinator, care coordinator, and she can be really helpful if people have questions and to make sure we're the right fit, because there are so many great people out there, and we just like to, we want to make sure that we're going to be useful in the world. But thank you again, Ari. Again, it's new ideas all the time, and going deeper. And I look forward to your interview with Dr. Navio. I just be like, okay, then people will get he'll be much more linear about it and explicative. So I urge people to take a listen.
Thank you so much, my friend. I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too.